February 28, 2026. The day the invincible facade of the Western Alliance officially cracked. In the pre-dawn hours, the sky over the Iranian plateau was illuminated by the catastrophic flashes of precision-guided munitions. In a highly classified, overwhelmingly violent operation, United States and Israeli aerospace forces executed a series of massive kinetic decapitation strikes. Utilizing stealth bombers, hypersonic standoff weapons, and electronic warfare sweeps, they systematically dismantled the command and control nodes of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) and buried the entrances to Iran's subterranean nuclear enrichment facilities under thousands of tons of rock. The tactical execution was flawless. The strategic blowback, however, was apocalyptic. The Iranian military, surviving the initial onslaught, immediately activated their ultimate, doomsday contingency plan. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. Within 24 hours, the 33-kilometer-wide maritime choke point, the geographic jugular vein through which a fifth of the world's daily oil consumption must pass, was transformed into an impassable kill zone. The IRGC seeded the shipping lanes with acoustic and magnetic naval mines. Swarms of Shahid suicide drones and fast-attack interceptor craft poured into the Gulf of Oman. Road-mobile anti-ship ballistic missiles were rolled out of mountain caves, locking their radars onto any commercial supertanker foolish enough to attempt the transit. The global energy market suffered an immediate, catastrophic cardiac arrest. Prediction markets and financial algorithms in London and New York instantly priced in a severe, unavoidable global recession. In Washington, D.C., the Trump administration mobilized for total naval war. The United States Fifth Fleet, already strained, prepared to execute forced entry operations to clear the strait and protect the tankers. But the Pentagon looked at the sheer, overwhelming volume of Iranian drones and missiles, and realized a terrifying truth. Fighting an attritional, multi-domain war of saturation requires a massive, continuous supply of interceptor missiles and a massive concentration of surface warships. The U.S. Navy could not do it alone without stripping the Indo-Pacific of its defenses against China. The White House picked up the phone. The message sent to the capitals of NATO, to London, to Paris, to Berlin, was not a request for diplomatic solidarity. It was a heavy-handed, transactional ultimatum. We are securing the energy that powers your continent. You will deploy your destroyers. You will join the coalition. You will share the blood and the treasure. For 75 years, the fundamental assumption of the post-World War II order was that when the United States goes to war for the global economy, Europe stands shoulder to shoulder with Washington. But as the sun rose over Europe on the 1st of March, the response from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the President of France, and the Chancellor of Germany was a unified, resounding, and historic shockwave. The answer was no. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a forensic, deep-dive tactical analysis into the most controversial, misunderstood, and monumental geopolitical fracture of the 21st century. Here is the thesis for this episode. An alliance is only as strong as its magazine depth and its logistical bandwidth. The era of the do-it-all global NATO is dead. You cannot fight a high-intensity drone saturation war in the Middle East when your fleets are mathematically too small to secure your own home waters. If you are beginning to understand why the true metrics of global power are not based on diplomatic handshakes at a summit, but on the cold, unforgiving mathematics of vertical launch cells, shipyard capacity, and geographic survival, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the political spin, the media outrage, and the simplistic narratives to bring you the kinetic, logistical realities of how the free world actually fights, prioritizes, and fractures. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. When the news broke that the major European powers refused to join the US-led kinetic strikes in the Persian Gulf, the mainstream media immediately framed it as a political spat. Pundits on American television screamed that Europe was freeloading, that they were cowardly pacifists, and that they were deliberately snubbing the unpredictable Trump administration. They are completely, fundamentally missing the point. NATO's refusal is not about political theater. It is a masterclass in ruthless, cold-blooded strategic realism. It is the realization that Europe is currently caught in a massive, mathematically unwinnable geopolitical trap. We are going to break down the Article 5 firewall, how European leaders are utilizing the strict legal boundaries of the NATO treaty to prevent themselves from being dragged into a war of choice. We are going to expose the zero-sum fleet crisis, the brutal hardware limitations of the Royal Navy and the French Marine Nationale, and why sending a destroyer to the Gulf leaves Europe mathematically naked against Russia. We will analyze the energy hostage dilemma, why Europe is choosing an inflationary nightmare over the kinetic destruction of its own domestic infrastructure. And finally, we will look at the transatlantic fracture, and what it means for a United States that must now fight the Middle East entirely alone. Let us begin by looking at the legal and strategic maneuvering in Brussels, and how Europe built a firewall against Washington. The architecture of defense. To understand why the NATO capitals flatly refused the American demand for military intervention, you must first strip away the emotion of the transatlantic alliance and look at the exact, unyielding legal architecture of the North Atlantic Treaty itself. For the last 3 decades, during the global war on terror, the definition of NATO had been stretched to its absolute breaking point. We saw NATO forces deploying to the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. The alliance morphed in the public consciousness from a static, defensive shield protecting the European continent into a global expeditionary force that functioned as an extension of American foreign policy. But the events of February 28, 2026, forced Europe to slam on the brakes and return to the absolute, literal text of the treaty. The core of the NATO alliance is Article 5, the principle of collective defense. An armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. The European heads of state, convening in emergency sessions in Paris, London, and Berlin, looked at the kinetic reality of the February 28 operations. The US and Israeli aerospace forces had launched a massive, preemptive decapitation strike against Iranian sovereign territory. It was, by every military and legal definition, an offensive operation. It was a war of choice, initiated to eliminate a perceived, imminent nuclear threat. When Iran retaliated by closing the Strait of Hormuz, they were responding to an American first strike. The European leaders seized upon this reality with ruthless legal precision. They established the Article 5 firewall. They stated unequivocally behind closed doors to US envoys that the collective defense clause had not been triggered. The United States had not been attacked unprovoked in its home territory, it had initiated a conflict in the Middle East. Therefore, Europe had absolutely zero legal or treaty-bound obligation to join the fight. The deliberate geopolitical quarantine. This legalistic maneuvering was not born of cowardice. It was a deliberate, highly calculated geopolitical quarantine. The governments of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom recognized that if they committed their military forces to a kinetic war in Iran alongside the Trump administration, they were forfeiting control of their own national destinies. They would be entering a chaotic, multi-domain conflict with an adversary that possesses a massive, highly sophisticated ballistic missile arsenal, an extensive network of proxy militias across the Middle East, and the backing of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, they lacked certainty of objectives. The European capitals looked at Washington and asked the ultimate, unanswerable question. What is the end state? Are we trying to reopen a shipping lane, or are we trying to enact regime change in Tehran? Are we prepared to occupy Iranian territory? Are we prepared for a 10-year war of attrition? Without a clear, achievable exit strategy, the European powers refused to write a blank check in blood and treasure. By hiding behind the strictly defensive mandate of the NATO Charter, Europe effectively quarantined the conflict. They drew a hard line in the sand, signaling to Washington that while they remain committed to defending the European continent against Russian tanks, they will not be dragged into a Middle Eastern quagmire sparked by an American preemptive strike. They refused to let an out-of-area operation automatically trigger a continent-wide war mandate. It was the ultimate assertion of European strategic autonomy, and it set the stage for the massive hardware limitations that truly drove the decision. The illusion of European naval mass. The diplomatic firewall was the excuse. The hardware is the reason. If you want to understand why NATO refused to sail into the Strait of Hormuz, you must look past the prestige of their naval ensigns and look directly into the vertical launch magazines of their warships. The Royal Navy and the French Marine Nationale are highly professional, technologically exquisite forces. They field some of the most advanced surface combatants on the planet, but they suffer from a fatal, incurable disease in modern warfare. They are incredibly, dangerously small. When the US Fifth Fleet asked for assistance to clear the drone swarms over the Gulf of Oman, they were asking for high-end, dedicated integrated air and missile defense, IAMD, platforms. For the United Kingdom, that means deploying the Type 45 Daring-class destroyers. These 8,000-ton ships are masterpieces. They are equipped with the Samson Active Electronically Scanned Array, ESA, radar, which is arguably the best air-tracking radar in the world. They carry the Sea Viper, POMS, combat system. For France and Italy, that means deploying the Horizon-class frigates, equipped with similar radar architecture and the exact same interceptor missiles. These ships are the perfect tools to swat Iranian Shahid drones and anti-ship cruise missiles out of the sky. But here is the crushing, brutal mathematics of the zero-sum fleet. The Royal Navy only possesses 6 Type 45 destroyers. Because of the rule of threes in naval logistics, where one ship is in deep maintenance, one is training, and one is operational, the UK realistically only has 2, perhaps 3 Type 45s available for deployment at any given moment. France only has 2 Horizon-class frigates. If the UK sends 2 Type 45 destroyers and France sends a Horizon-class frigate to the Strait of Hormuz, they have committed the vast majority of their operational air defense capability to a single, localized choke point 3,000 miles from home. The nightmare of magazine depletion. Once those ships arrive in the Gulf, they enter a mathematical meat grinder. The Iranian military doctrine relies on attritable mass. They do not fire one expensive missile. They fire a swarm of 50 cheap, mass-produced suicide drones, followed by a wave of anti-ship ballistic missiles. A British Type 45 destroyer possesses 48 vertical launch system (VLS) cells, packed with Aster 15 and Aster 30 interceptor missiles. A French Horizon class has the same 48-cell limitation. When a swarm of Iranian drones descends on a commercial tanker convoy, the European destroyers must open fire. The Aster 30 is a phenomenal hyperaccurate missile. It hits its target almost every time. But every time an Aster missile leaves the silo, it costs approximately $2 million. The Royal Navy ship is forced to fire a $2 million highly sophisticated interceptor to destroy a $20,000 propeller-driven drone. This is the cost-exchange ratio of hell. Within days or perhaps even hours of sustained high-intensity drone saturation attacks, the magazines of the European destroyers will be completely depleted. The 48 VLS cells will be empty. Once the magazines are dry, the ships cannot be reloaded at sea. They must retreat to a secure, deep-water port with specialized cranes. And more terrifyingly, the European defense industrial base simply does not possess the stockpiles to replace those missiles. Over the last 30 years, European missile production lines were optimized for peacetime efficiency. They produce Aster missiles at a glacial, boutique pace. If a British destroyer burns through 48 Aster missiles in a week in the Strait of Hormuz, it might take the European defense industry 2 years to manufacture the replacements. If Europe joins the fight, they will effectively disarm their own navies within a month. The Baltic and Mediterranean vacuum. But the magazine depletion is only half the crisis. The other half is the geographic vacuum. We are operating in a zero-sum reality. If you move a ship to the Middle East, you leave a gaping, fatal hole in your own home waters. While the world is focused on Iran, the Russian Federation is watching with intense, calculating interest. The Russian Northern Fleet, operating out of the Kola Peninsula, possesses the Yazanem-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarines. These are some of the quietest, most heavily armed submarines on Earth, capable of launching Caliber and Zircon hypersonic missiles into the heart of Europe. The primary mission of the Royal Navy's Type 45 destroyers and the French frigates is to protect the Greenland-Iceland UK (JUK) gap, to secure the North Sea, and to project an air defense umbrella over the Baltic Sea to protect NATO's eastern flank. If those destroyers are sitting in the Persian Gulf shooting at Iranian drones, the North Atlantic is left completely naked. The Mediterranean Sea is left undefended against Russian naval assets operating out of Tartus in Syria. The strategic planners in London and Paris looked at the map and realized that they were being asked to leave their own front door wide open to defend an oil pipeline in the desert. They realized that the true threat to their national survival was not a closed Strait of Hormuz. The true threat was a Russian nuclear submarine slipping undetected into the Atlantic because the Royal Navy was too busy fighting an American war in the Middle East. The brutal math dictated the decision. Europe simply does not possess the hulls, the missiles, or the industrial capacity to fight a two-front naval war. They had to prioritize their own continent. The macroeconomic nightmare. If the naval math is terrifying, the economic reality facing the European continent in 2026 is apocalyptic. To understand why Europe is refusing to fire a shot at Iran, you must look at the brutal, traumatic energy history of the continent over the last 4 years. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the subsequent sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, Europe experienced a devastating, civilization-altering energy shock. They were forced to painfully, aggressively, and expensively decouple their entire industrial base from cheap Russian natural gas. To survive the winters and keep their factories running, Germany, France, and the UK pivoted entirely to maritime imports. They built massive floating liquefied natural gas, LNG, terminals. And they became almost wholly dependent on LNG shipments originating from the United States, and critically from the state of Qatar in the Persian Gulf. Qatar shares the massive North Field gas reservoir with Iran. The endless procession of massive Qmax LNG carrier ships leaving Qatar must transit directly through the Strait of Hormuz to reach the Mediterranean and the ports of northern Europe. When Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz on February 28, they didn't just trap oil bound for China, they severed the primary gas artery keeping the European power grid alive. The European leaders were presented with an economic hostage situation. Washington argued that this was the exact reason Europe must join the military coalition, to fight their way through the blockade and secure their own energy supply. But the economists in Berlin and Paris ran the numbers and came to a much darker conclusion: the retaliation calculus. If European militaries actively joined the kinetic strikes against Iranian assets, if French Rafales dropped bombs on IRGC coastal batteries, or British destroyers sank Iranian fast attack craft, they instantly transformed the European continent into a legitimate target for Iranian retaliation. Iran does not need to send an army to Europe to exact revenge. They possess a massive, highly sophisticated network of proxy militias across the Middle East and North Africa. If France joins the war, Iranian-backed militias could immediately target the permanent French military bases in the United Arab Emirates and Djibouti. If the UK joins the war, the British logistical hub at Doctrine, Oman becomes a target for ballistic missiles. More terrifyingly, Iran could activate Hezbollah and other sleeper cells to execute sabotage and asymmetric attacks directly against European energy infrastructure in the Mediterranean, or even sponsor domestic terrorism within European cities. The European capitals realized that actively fighting Iran would not reopen the Strait of Hormuz faster. It would simply guarantee that the conflict expanded globally, pulling their own domestic populations into the crossfire. They made a cold, ruthless calculation of acceptable losses. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz guarantees a massive, devastating economic shock. Energy prices across Europe will quadruple. The prediction markets are already pricing in a guaranteed return of 15% to 20% inflation. Factories in the German Ruhr Valley will be forced to throttle down operations or close entirely due to power rationing. The political backlash from the civilian population will be immense, and governments will likely fall. It is an economic nuclear winter. But the leaders in Paris and Berlin determined that an economic depression, while devastating, is a survivable, temporary trauma. The global energy markets will eventually adapt. The United States Navy, out of pure self-interest and sheer brute force, will eventually grind down the Iranian defenses and reopen the strait, even without European help. However, if Europe joins the kinetic war, burns through its entire stockpile of precision-guided munitions, gets its forward bases destroyed by proxy missiles, and leaves its home waters undefended against Russia, the damage is permanent and existential. They chose the pain at the gas pump over the annihilation of their own military-industrial base. They chose to let the United States bear the entire financial, military, and political burden of fighting the war, while Europe hunkered down, rations its energy, and focuses entirely on surviving the economic fallout. The retreat to the continent. The refusal of NATO to join the US-led coalition in the 2026 Iran war is a watershed moment in the military and diplomatic history of the 21st century. It marks the definitive, undeniable end of the global NATO experiment. For the last 2 decades, American presidents operated under the comforting assumption that the unparalleled, hyper-integrated military capability of the Western alliance could be projected anywhere on the globe. We believed that European navies and American carrier strike groups were interchangeable components of a single, invincible armada. The events of February 28 have shattered that illusion permanently. The European powers have officially outgrown the reflex to simply follow Washington into the desert. They have recognized the brutal reality of their own deindustrialization. They have looked at their hollowed-out shipyards, their empty missile magazines, and their fragile energy grids, and they have accepted their limitations. NATO is retreating to its origins. It is returning to its role as a regional, continental defense pact. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany are explicitly signaling to the world that their finite, irreplaceable military assets will be hoarded, preserved, and concentrated exclusively for the defense of the European theater against the Russian Federation. They are refusing to squander their elite destroyers and frigates in a Middle Eastern war of attrition. The American isolation. For the United States, the realization is stark and deeply isolating. As the U.S. Navy battles drone swarms in the Gulf of Oman and attempts to suppress ballistic missile launches from the Iranian coast, they are looking at their radar screens and realizing they are fighting alone. The British flag is not there. The French flag is not there. The United States has spent 80 years subsidizing the defense of the free world, assuming that when the global commons were threatened, the free world would answer the call. But the brutal mathematics of modern warfare dictate otherwise. The cost of interceptor missiles, the vulnerability of global supply chains, and the terrifying reality of the zero-sum fleet have forced America's closest allies to make ruthless, selfish decisions for their own geographic survival. The transatlantic fracture is complete. The United States must now face the sobering reality that if it wishes to police the Middle East, secure the Indo-Pacific and maintain the global economic order, it must do so with its own ships, its own missiles and its own blood. The era of coalition warfare in the Middle East is dead. The magazines of Europe are empty, and their ships are staying home. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that Europe made the right strategic choice by abandoning the US to protect their own home waters? Or does refusing to secure the global oil supply guarantee their own economic ruin regardless? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp.